I never imagined my world would start to crumble while standing in the warmth of our small, cozy kitchen. Derek, my husband of 7 years, was talking on the phone, his back turned to me, oblivious to my presence. My mother had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the weight of that reality was crushing me. But Derek seemed more concerned with something else entirely. "Yeah, she's an only child," Derek said, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and greed I'd never noticed before. "Do you think the insurance will be a big payout?" Right. Make sure to look into it." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Was he really discussing my mother's life insurance at a time like this? As he hung up, he turned and finally noticed me. "Oh, Lillian, didn't see you there. Was just talking to a buddy about some work stuff." "Work stuff?" I echoed, my voice hollow. The lie was blatant, and a pit formed in my stomach. "Yeah, just regular things. How's your mom?" he asked, but the question felt obligatory, devoid of genuine concern. "She's struggling," I admitted, fighting the lump in my throat. "Derek, were you really talking about her insurance?" He paused, then shrugged, an unsettling smile playing on his lips. "Well, yeah, it's practical to think about these things, right? I mean, it's sad, but we gotta be prepared." Prepared? For what? My mother's death was a ticking clock, and here he was, counting the potential inheritance. I wanted to scream, to cry, to make him see the monstrous nature of his thoughts. But I stood frozen, disbelief chaining my words. "It's not just about the money, Derek. She's my mother," I said, barely a whisper. Of course, he replied too quickly, his eyes not meeting mine. "But life goes on, Lillian. We need to think about the future." His words felt like a betrayal, a stark revelation of the man I had married. Was this always who he was? A cold, calculating stranger? I turned away, the room suddenly feeling too small, his presence too suffocating. "I need some air," I managed to choke out before stepping outside, leaving Derek and his twisted priorities behind. The evening air did little to soothe the turmoil inside me. My mother's gentle smile, her warmth, the way she always knew how to make everything all right, flashed through my mind. And juxtaposed with that was Derek, discussing her death like a business transaction. I couldn't reconcile the two images, and as the night grew darker, so did the realization that the man I shared my life with was a stranger. A stranger who saw my mother's impending death as nothing more than an opportunity for financial gain. Tears blurred my vision, not just for my mother's fate, but for the loss of the man I thought I knew. In that moment, a resolve began to form. Derek's callousness had opened my eyes to the truth, and I knew I couldn't let this go. I had to protect my mother's legacy from the man who saw her life in dollar signs. And I would start by uncovering every lie, every deceitful plan he harbored. It was time for Derek to see that I was not the naive, compliant wife he took me for. As I walked back inside, the path forward was clear. It would be difficult, even painful, but I was determined. Derek had awakened a strength in me I never knew I had, and for my mother's sake, I would fight back. The next day, I visited my mother at the hospital, the sterile smell and quiet hum of machines surrounding us. She was weak, but managed to smile when she saw me. We talked about everything except her illness and the looming shadow it cast over our lives. It was a temporary escape, a moment of normalcy in the chaos. Returning home, the atmosphere shifted the moment I stepped through the door. Derek was on the phone again, his voice hushed but intense. He didn't notice my arrival, too engrossed in his conversation. No, we can't rush this," he whispered, pacing the living room. "It's a delicate situation. Yeah, once the insurance comes through, we'll be set. Just need to play it cool for now." My heart sank. There it was again, his obsession with the insurance money. Anger bubbled inside me, a stark contrast to the sadness I felt just moments ago. I cleared my throat and Derek jumped, his guilty gaze meeting mine. "Lillian, you're back early." Ignoring his feigned surprise, I confronted him. "Who were you talking to about playing it cool? And what insurance are you waiting for?" He hesitated, then laughed it off. "Babe, you're overthinking it. Just work stuff. You know how it is." "Work stuff," I repeated, the lie tasting bitter. "Derek, why are you so interested in my mother's insurance? Shouldn't we be focusing on her, on spending time with her, instead of whatever this is?" He scoffed, his demeanor changing. "Lillian, be realistic. Your mom's not gonna get better. We need to think about the future, our future." I stared at him, disbelief and disgust mingling. My mother is dying, Derek, and all you can think about is money? He rolled his eyes, frustration evident. You're being too emotional. It's not just about the money. It's about security, our security. Security by capitalizing on my mother's death? I shot back, my voice rising. Derek approached, his expression hardening. Listen, Lillian, you might not like it, but that's how the world works. We need to look out for ourselves. If you're too blinded by your emotions to see that, then I don't know what to tell you. His words were like a slap in the face, revealing the depth of his selfishness. It was clear Derek had no empathy, no love for anything beyond his own desires. That's how you see it, huh? I said, my voice cold. Well, I see a man so consumed by greed, he can't even pretend to care about his dying mother-in-law or his wife. Derek sneered. Maybe if you weren't so naive, you'd understand. But go ahead, keep living in your little fantasy world where everything's fine. The conversation was going nowhere, and I realized arguing with Derek was useless.
He was lost, consumed by his own greed.
But I wasn't gonna let him drag me down with him. Turning on my heel, I left him standing there, his words echoing in the now empty room. I needed a plan, a way to protect my mother's legacy, and ensure Derek wouldn't get a penny of it. As I headed to my room, the pieces of a plan began to form in my mind. Derek wanted a battle. He'd get one, but unlike him, I'd be fighting for something far more important than money. Over the next few days, I watched Derek like a hawk, noting every phone call, every sneaky glance he thought I didn't catch. His obsession with the insurance money grew more apparent, and so did his negligence towards anything that didn't serve his agenda. One evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner, the silence between us was palpable.
He broke it, his voice dripping with faux concern.
So did you talk to your mom about the insurance? I paused, fork midair, staring at him incredulously. You're really gonna bring this up now? At dinner?
He shrugged, unabashed.
It's an important conversation, Lillian. We need to know where we stand financially. I set my fork down, my appetite gone. My mother is dying, Derek, and all you can think about is money. It's disgusting.
He leaned forward, a cold glint in his eyes.
It's not disgusting, Lillian. It's practical. Your mother wouldn't want you to be left struggling. I scoffed. You don't know the first thing about what my mother wants. The conversation spiraled into yet another argument, Derek's greed clashing with my disgust. It was clear we were on two different paths, his paved with gold, mine with the desire to do right by my mother. After dinner, I retreated to my room, a plan forming in my mind. It was time to take action, to ensure Derek's schemes would fall flat. I started researching, digging into legal documents, insurance policies, and anything else that could help me protect my mother's interests. The next morning, I made a call to a family lawyer, explaining my situation and seeking advice on how to safeguard my mother's assets from Derek's clutches. The lawyer was sympathetic, offering guidance on how to proceed. Armed with this new knowledge, I confronted Derek again. This time I was prepared. Derek, I've spoken to a lawyer, I announced as I entered the living room where he was lounging, scrolling through his phone.
He looked up, a flicker of concern crossing his face.
A lawyer? Why? To ensure my mother's wishes are respected and her assets are protected from anyone who might have ulterior motives.
He laughed, but there was an edge to it. You're being dramatic, Lillian. What, you think I'm some kind of villain?
No, not dramatic. Just cautious, I replied, meeting his gaze squarely. I'm making sure that my mother's legacy is used as she intended. I am making sure that my mother's legacy is used as she intended, not as a payday for someone else's greed. The conversation escalated quickly, Derek's anger flaring as he realized I was serious about blocking his access to the insurance money.
You can't do this, Lillian.
We are married.
What's yours is mine, he spat, his composure slipping.
Not anymore, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I am filing for separation, Derek. I won't let you exploit my mother's death for your own gain.
The revelation hit Derek like a ton of bricks. His anger turned to panic as he realized his plans were crumbling.
Lillian, you do mean that?
We can work this out, he pleaded, his arrogance replaced by desperation.
But it was too late. I had seen the true extent of his greed and there was no going back. I do mean it, Derek. It's over. I left him standing there, his future plans shattering around him. It was a decisive moment, one that marked the beginning of my journey to ensure justice for my mother and a future free from Derek's destructive greed. The days following my declaration of separation were filled with tension.
Derek oscillated between trying to sweet-talk me into changing my mind and expressing his outrage over my actions.
However, I remained firm, bolstered by the support of my lawyer and the clarity of my mission. One evening, as I was organizing documents related to my mother's care, Derek stormed into the room, his face a mask of anger and desperation.
You can't do this to me, Lillian. You can't just cut me off and expect me to accept it. He bellowed, his fists clenched at his sides.
I looked up from the papers, meeting his gaze with a calm I didn't feel. I can and I am. You've made it abundantly clear where your priorities lie, Derek. It's not with me, and it's certainly not with my mother.
He paced back and forth, a caged animal. You're being selfish. You're thinking only about yourself and your mother. What about us? What about what I need?
Us? I echoed, incredulous. There is no us, not when you see my mother's death as a financial opportunity. You've shown me who you truly are, Derek.
He stopped pacing, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. Lillian, please. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, talk it out.
The plea was almost laughable. Talk it out? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. There's nothing to talk out, Derek. Your actions and words have spoken louder than any therapy session ever could.
Derek's face hardened, the brief flash of desperation giving way to cold fury. You'll regret this, Lillian. If you think you can just divorce me and walk away with everything, you're mistaken. I'll fight you on this. I'll make sure you get nothing.
His threat hung in the air between us, heavy and ominous. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of resolve. You can try, Derek, but you'll find that I'm not as easy to bully or manipulate as you think. I'm fighting for what's right for my mother's dignity and her wishes. You're fighting for greed. We'll see who comes out on top. Derek glared at me, his jaw working as if he wanted to say more. But instead, he stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my documents and my determination. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and meetings with my lawyer. Derek tried to contest the separation to lay claim to assets and money that he believed he was entitled to. But with each attempt, he found himself blocked by the legal safeguards I had put in place, his greed and malice turning to frustration and defeat. As the day of the court hearing approached, I prepared myself for the final confrontation. Derek had become more erratic, his threats more desperate, but I refused to be intimidated. I had truth and justice on my side, and I was ready to fight for them, no matter what Derek threw my way. The courthouse was imposing, its stone walls, solemn atmosphere a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. Derek was already there, his posture rigid, a mask of defiance plastered on his face. I avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the strength I had garnered over the past weeks. When our case was called, we stood before the judge, a no-nonsense woman with a keen eye. She reviewed the documents, her gaze shifting between us, piercing and calculating. Mr. Turner, this is a matter of division of assets, and the finalization of your separation, the judge said. Mrs. Turner, you've made allegations regarding Mr. Turner's intentions towards your mother's estate. How do you wish to proceed? Before I could speak, Derek interjected, Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. I've always had Lillian's and her mother's best interests at heart. His words were like venom, smooth and deadly. I clenched my fists, feeling my lawyer's reassuring glance. Your Honor, if I may, my lawyer began, standing to address the court. We have documented evidence of Mr. Turner's attempts to manipulate Mrs. Turner into securing a significant portion of her mother's estate for his own gain. His interest in their assets spiked notably upon the diagnosis of Mrs. Turner's mother's illness. The judge nodded, indicating for my lawyer to continue. As evidence was presented, Derek's facade began to crumble, his discomfort visible to all in the courtroom. And so, my lawyer concluded, we request that the court recognize Mrs. Mieps Turner's sole right to her mother's estate and enforce a fair division of their shared assets, free from Mr. Turner's coercion. The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered the evidence before her. Derek's lawyer attempted to counter, arguing for his client's rights and contributions to the marriage. However, the greed and malice behind Derek's actions were too apparent, the evidence against him damning. Finally, the judge spoke, her voice firm and authoritative. After reviewing the evidence and considering the testimonies, it's clear to the court that Mr. Turner's actions were motivated by self-interest at the expense of his wife and her ailing mother. She continued, outlining her decision, which included the protection of my mother's estate from Derek's reach and a fair division of our assets that reflected our contributions to the marriage. Derek was to receive far less than he had anticipated, a direct consequence of his actions. As the judge pronounced the judgment, Derek's face went white, the reality of his defeat settling in. He had underestimated me, thinking he could bully me into submission. But standing there in the courthouse, victory at hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Derek attempted to protest, but it was over. The judge's decision was final. Outside the courthouse, he approached me, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this, Lillian. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the last of me," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "No, Derek, it's you who will regret underestimating me. I've done nothing but protect myself and my mother from your greed. Go ahead and try whatever you want, but know this. I am no longer the person you can manipulate and control. This is the last you've seen of me." Turning away from him, I walked into the sunlight, a free woman at last. The battle was over, and though I knew Derek might never change, I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my mother's legacy. In the weeks following the court decision, I focused on rebuilding my life with my daughter, away from the shadow Derek had cast over us. My mother's health continued to decline, and I cherished every moment I could spend with her, knowing they were precious. One day, as I was returning from visiting my mother, I found Derek waiting outside my new apartment, a sight I had dreaded yet anticipated. His appearance was disheveled, a far cry from the confident man he once portrayed. "Lillian, we need to talk," he said, his voice lacking its former assertiveness. I stopped in my tracks, wary. "There's nothing left to discuss, Derek. You've made your intentions clear, and so have I." He shuffled uncomfortably, looking around before fixing his gaze on me. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I was wrong, Lillian. I see that now. I was blinded by greed." Hearing the word greed come from his mouth felt surreal, almost as if he had finally come to terms with the root of his downfall. Yet I remained skeptical. Realizations come a bit late, don't they? I responded coolly. Derek took a step closer, desperation seeping into his tone. "Please, Lillian. I've lost everything. My job, my friends, I have nothing. I need help." His plea, though filled with apparent remorse, didn't stir the sympathy he likely hoped for. "You chose this path, Derek. You prioritized money over everything else, over us. You can't expect me to simply forgive and forget." "But I've changed, Lillian. I can prove it to you. To everyone. Just give me a chance," he implored, his eyes searching mine for a sign of forgiveness. It was then I realized the depth of Derek's destruction. He had been consumed by his greed, and now stripped of his ambitions and schemes, he was left with nothing but regret. "Derek, it's too late for chances. You made your decisions, and now you must live with them," I said firmly, my heart hardening against the sight of the man who had once shared my life. He seemed to shrink before my eyes, the finality of my words hitting him. "I'm sorry, Lillian. Truly I am," he murmured before turning and walking away, a broken man. As I watched him disappear, a mix of emotions washed over me. Pity for the man Derek had become, relief for the freedom I now had, and sadness for the love that had once been but was destroyed by greed and deceit. In the days that followed, rumors reached me of Derek's continued downfall. He tried to rebuild his life, but his reputation preceded him, a constant reminder of his actions. Eventually, he left town, seeking a fresh start elsewhere, but the damage was done. Derek's demise was a testament to the consequences of his choices, a stark warning of the destruction greed can bring. I turned my attention back to my life, to my daughter and my ailing mother, focusing on healing and moving forward. Derek's chapter in our lives was closed, a painful but necessary end to a story that had taken us through the darkest of times to emerge stronger, wiser, and free.